Greetings, fellow conquerors. This is darkfireslide, and welcome to another guide about ideas in EU4. Today we're going to be talking about offensive versus defensive ideas. And this is kind of a contentious subject because I think that the names are a little bit misleading. In fact, in my opinion, I think it would be better to call these ideas leadership versus logistics ideas. And we'll explain that once we get into the ideas here. So let's go ahead and take a look at what both of the idea groups actually get, and then we'll talk about their uses, when you should take them, and if one is better than the other or not. Alright, so first of all, let's start with offensive ideas. For starters, you get bayonet leaders, which gives you land leader shock +1. This is extremely good, and the reason why is because the way general pips are calculated in EU4, you get a random number plus or minus some dependent on your army tradition every 20 army tradition or so. So at 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100, you will get an additional set of numbers, plus or minus a certain amount of randomized selections in terms of where it places those points. Getting bayonet leaders guarantees that you will always have at least one shock pip, if nothing else, and this is extremely useful both in the early game, where shock is extremely dominant, and even if... Here's the thing about this, and the bonus fire pip that this idea group gets later on. Even if you roll a 0 and you get a 1 shock, and you're still fighting like an enemy general who has like 3 shock, having that 1 shock is still better than having 0 shock, because you're going to reduce your effective casualties by about 12 to 15% just by having that extra pip, and even though you're still at a disadvantage because you got a bad roll. So this is always useful all the time. It's very, very, very strong. And so, yeah, that's what that does, and this is regardless of army tradition. No matter what army tradition you have, if you're at 0 army tradition, you will always have +1 to land leader shock, which is why these can be especially effective in Asia. Although I guess we don't have to worry about losing a bunch of army tradition from westernizing anymore. So never mind, not relevant. All right, next we get national conscripts, recruitment time -10%. I don't think this is a very good idea. Even if you combine it with others, like you're training infantry in 26 days instead of let's see, let's just get like an exact number here. It's not by a whole lot. So as we can see, infantry in certain provinces are going to take about 57 days, about 60 on average. So you're reducing the amount of days it takes to build a normal infantry regiment, I guess it would be regiment, by 6 days. And even if you combine that with another one, it's by 12 days. Ideally, in any war, you want to have your army built up ahead of time, and even with mercs, mercs already take so little time to build, 14 days, that getting a reduction of 1 or 2 days isn't really going to make a big difference. So I think that idea is kind of crap, to be completely honest. Though it does help with artillery a little bit, because artillery typically take 120 days, and so you're getting a 12-day reduction in terms of build time. Alright, next we get superior firepower, which gives land leader fire +1. This is, like I explained with shock, extremely good, but this is more of a late game idea, which is why offensive ideas is good both in the early and the late game, because of the general pips, and as I've explained, having at least one is always good, even if the enemy general is better. Alright, next we get glorious arms. We get prestige from land battles +100%. Now, the usefulness of this ability is going to depend on a number of things. One, it's going to depend on how many wars you fight. 2, it's going to depend on how many prestige ideas your nation already gets. For example, if you already get +1 yearly prestige, this may or may not be useful to you depending on the third criteria, which is how much you value prestige. Personally, I love prestige. I think prestige is amazing. It gives all of these bonuses, including, most importantly, morale of armies. And so this in a way is a bonus to the amount of morale that your troops get if you're fighting a lot of battles and fighting a lot of wars. And the reason for that is because you're getting more prestige. You're getting double the amount of prestige from every battle, and that's really useful when you're getting normally about, for big battles, 2 to 4 prestige, and so you're getting double from that. And so after a couple of battles, your prestige can skyrocket, basically, near to or even at 100, basically. So I think it's a pretty good idea, but some people don't value prestige very much, and so to people who don't value prestige very much, this is not going to be that good for you. Next we have Engineer Corps, which gives siege ability +20%. This is pretty significant. A lot of people cite this as the best part of this idea group, and it's not hard to see why. If you consider that the normal siege tick is about 30 days, then that's going to reduce that 30 days down to 24 days. And over the course of a year, you go 12 months, or even just 10 months. That's 120 days off of a 10-month siege. So That's like 3 or 4 months that you're saving there, which is really strong. And especially if you have a lot of army tradition by taking quality or defensive ideas anyway, or just from fighting a lot of battles, it's going to further increase your siege ability. And so this is just really strong, I think. Next we get Grand Army, which is land force limit plus 20%. This is pretty good. It's not the 50% you get for completing quantity ideas, even though this is fairly close to the end of offensive ideas. It's still useful, and having an additional 20% troops can be what you need to break a stalemate or win a war. And so I think that this is a pretty good ability. It's not incredible because it's not the 50% that you get from quantity, but the nice thing about it is if you're a rich nation, or even if you're not a rich nation, it can be just enough to pay for those additional troops without bankrupting your country, basically. So I think it's pretty good being able to build. If you have 100 regiments, you can build 120 regiments now. So pretty useful overall, I would say, even though not as good as quantity ideas in that respect. Next we get Esprit de Corps, which gives a discipline bonus of 5%. Pretty standard, same thing you get from finishing quality ideas, and a lot of national ideas give a bonus to this. To give an idea of what this does, discipline is basically, in the math of it, a literal 5% increase in damage. So if your troops inflicted 100 casualties with 5% discipline, they would inflict 105. Over 10 ticks, this would be an additional 50 casualties. And in general, the way the math works, it also reduces casualties by 5%. So 5% discipline by itself is okay. Once you start getting to 115 and 120% discipline, it makes a massive difference in the amount of damage you're taking, in the reduction of the damage you're taking and the damage you inflict upon your enemies. So this is a good start. Obviously by itself, not as good, but it is a start to getting a very strong army. Lastly, we get Recover Army Morale Speed plus 5%. Now, I'm fairly certain that this is a flat modifier. So, if we go here, we look at our morale bar. We are currently recovering 25.5% of its maximum morale each month. And so this would go up to 30.5% of its maximum morale each month. Which is okay. I mean, it's going to go up to probably about 0.75, 0.8 instead of the 0.65 that it currently is at this land morale in the start date. But is it useful? I don't know. I mean, most of the time when you're recovering, you're building up again. This is basically just going to let you attack. It's going to save you a couple days. Is basically what it's going to do. It might save you like 1 month in terms of recovery. So I don't think it's that great. It's nice, but it's not great. Kind of like recruitment time. I think it's better than recruitment time, but not by much. Okay, so that's offensive ideas. Let's talk about defensive ideas now. Alright, so first thing you get for defensive ideas is yearly Army Tradition +1. This is really good. And this is the reason it's really good. Because this increases your Army Tradition, yes, but because of the amount that you're getting, it sets your resting point to about 20 Army Tradition, which is a really good break point for a lot of generals. Because every 20 points of Army Tradition that you get, you have a better chance of getting a better general. So this is really conducive to that. Even though you don't get any guaranteed pips, you do get more potential pips. It also increases morale of armies by a significant portion. I believe 100% land morale increases, or 100 Army Tradition increases your morale by something like 30 to 40%. So getting Army Tradition is really useful for having morale of armies, and manpower recovery speed is just nice, and you also get siege ability out of this. Not nearly as much as you get from offensive ideas, but you do get siege ability from Army Tradition. And this stacks really well if you pick up quality ideas as well, because quality also gets yearly Army Tradition, and this will set your resting point to about 40 if you take both of these ideas. And that's if you're not fighting wars, because this is also going to impact the decay rate as well, and make it easier to maintain a higher Army Tradition and get more better potential generals, but not necessarily better generals. Alright, next we get Military Drill, which gives morale of armies plus 15%. This is an extremely powerful idea, and this idea alone makes defensive ideas arguably the best early game military idea group to take. Simply because this improves your morale. This is Spanish levels of morale. Like Spain or Castile, I should say, starts with this. they get 15% morale of armies. This is only 5% less than what France and Prussia get. So this is just extremely, really, really strong overall. And if you take that as Castile or France, your morale is going to just be absolutely ludicrous, especially because it combos with the previous idea of you're the army tradition. So that's just really, really, really strong, especially in the early game where morale is much more important than things like discipline and combat ability. Also raw numbers, which defensive ideas also improves, and we'll talk about that right now. With improved maneuver, which gives land leader maneuver +1. This is, in my opinion, not as good as the guaranteed fire and shock that you get from offensive ideas. Obviously, offensive gives you 2 guaranteed general pips of types that actually do damage and reduce incoming damage, if you think about it, because it lowers the effective dice roll of the enemy, which is a very, very powerful thing. But this will allow you to avoid river crossings, and more importantly, in my experience, what this allows you to do is send troops into better defensive provinces like mountains without suffering attrition, or without suffering as much attrition as you might have otherwise. This is often how you get 5-6 maneuver generals on average. And it's really good in general, basically, just because of that, that one aspect of it. It also allows your armies to move faster on the campaign map, to flee bigger armies or to pursue smaller ones that you wish to hunt down. So it's pretty good overall. I don't want to understate it, but I don't think it's as good as Land Leader Shock and Land Leader Fighter. Land Leader Fire, if I can speak English, my native tongue. All right, next we get the regimental system, which gives land maintenance -10%. This is really awesome, especially when paired with quantity ideas, which also gives that, and with economic ideas for a total of -30% land maintenance, which effectively would allow you to field, in theory, 30% more troops. Really strong, saves you a lot of money, and that's the great thing about this compared to offensive ideas, in my opinion, is that this gives you a bonus outside of war, because it's reducing the amount of money you're paying for your troops, which can be really, really helpful for pretty much every country. Unless you're just, raking in cash like England or France, basically most of the Western powers. Unless you're one of them, this is an extremely powerful idea. Alright, next we get defensive mentality, fort maintenance -10%, and fort defense +20%. This is nice. It reduces fort maintenance, which is ridiculously expensive. Normally it's about 1 ducat per level, I believe. Let's see. Let's just double check that. Yeah, so normally it's 1 ducat a month fully maintained, so this is going to lower that down to 0.9. If you've got 10 forts, then that just saves you a ducat a month, which is nothing to sneeze at, given that it also gives fort defense +20%, which means that they are 20% harder to siege. An enemy that doesn't have offensive ideas is going to have to spend 6 more days per month, basically, trying to whittle down your fort, and over the course of 10 months that can be an additional 2 months of siege time that somebody has to take in order to actually take your forts. Very, very strong, very good if you have a small number of forts, ironically, just because you can siege the enemy's forts faster than they can siege yours, basically. Alright, next we get supply trains, which improves reinforced speed +33%. The obvious comparison here is with recover army morale speed, but I think this idea is a lot better. And the reason for this is, especially when you're in enemy territory, enemy-occupied territory, you don't recover troops as fast as you would if you were in your own friendly territory. And so, the nice thing about this is your troops are going to recover very, very quickly in terms of manpower. Even if their morale's not up to date, they'll usually be able to fill the ranks with actual troops. And as a result, I think this is a very good idea. And a very unique one, too. No other bonus in the game really gives this, apart from defensive ideas. So that's a nice, unique thing that really, really helps in wars. Especially, ironically, offensively, this is a really good idea. Because typically, it's the most effective when you're in enemy territory. And if you're in your own territory, then your regiments are going to, replenish very, very quickly, if not almost instantly. Next, we get land attrition -25%. Very strong idea. I love this idea. It is very good, ironically as well, like with supply trains. This is really helpful on the offense because it reduces the amount of attrition that you take, especially because of for finishing defensive ideas, you get attrition for enemies +1. This really helps counteract people who have taken defensive ideas, and if you haven't, if you're not finding someone who's taken defensive ideas, then this reduces your effective attrition to 0.7%. It'd be 0.75 overall, but I think EU just rounds it to 0.7, or 0.8 even. but that's going to significantly reduce the amount of troops that you're burning on those. You can hide in the mountains more comfortably. Even if you're taking a little bit of attrition, it'll reduce that attrition as well. And so I just think that that's a really strong ability as well. And lastly, we get attrition for enemies +1, as we've discussed. The base attrition for being in enemy territory that you don't occupy is 1%. And so this raises that to 2%. Is that any good? Well, yes and no. So the thing that's really nice about that ability is for longer wars, that is going to significantly take a toll on your enemies. In areas such as Russia, where the base in the winter is going to be about 4%, this raises it to 5% attrition every month, which can very, very rapidly deplete armies. It also really discourages people from just marching through your lands without occupying anything, because that means they're going to take a lot of attrition for no reason, basically. And I think it's good, but if you're doing well, it's not really going to be that helpful. It's just going to kind of tickle the enemy's manpower, more or less. Okay, so when do I think you should take these idea groups, and why? So I think that defensive is a very, very solid, if not the best, idea group for the early game. And the reason for that is the army tradition, because you don't have a lot of army tradition at the beginning of the game, and morale of armies. These two ideas alone are extremely powerful in the early game and will help you win countless wars up until about the 1600s or so. And also, the land maintenance modifier, once you get to it, can really help kickstart your economy if you're playing a smaller country, and help you build up to those extra troops, especially if you take quantity ideas as your second idea group, or economics as your first admin idea group. Offensive ideas is still a solid pick for the early game because of the guaranteed general pips. This can help you win some battles. The extra siege ability will help you win wars faster, which can help you expand more quickly. And the prestige is nice as well. Force limit, also good for the early game. And discipline, I don't know. The discipline is the thing where it's kind of like, it's good. It's very good in the late game, but not very good in the early game because you can't stack it as easily in the early game. So overall, I think defensive ideas is probably the best pick for the early game if you are having to choose between these two. Obviously, you could always take both if you want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. Both will give you a very powerful army, but you won't get the raw benefits of quality ideas or the manpower and money benefits of quantity ideas if you do that until the very late game, if you take a third military idea group of that style and you don't take quality instead. Anyway, rambling. So I think offensive of the two is the much better late game pick, and the reason for that is usually by the late game you are a very large nation. You don't need to worry about money as much. Your army tradition is already very high because you've been fighting wars constantly, hopefully, up until that point. The discipline is going to stack well with other discipline bonuses. You're going to be able to get some policies, perhaps quality and economic, for example, that give more discipline. I'm not really mentioning the policies here, but overall offensive ideas have much better policies than defensive ideas, without getting into the specifics because it would take too long. But yeah, overall, I think offensive is the better late game group. Defensive is the best, probably the best early game pick for the reasons that I've listed. That being said, again, offensive ideas is not a bad early game group by any stretch of the imagination, but defensive I think is just better because of the bonuses. And overall, though, I think I would have to give the edge to offensive ideas as a better quote-unquote group. But like most things in EU4, it's very situational. It's going to depend on how you like to play and what you're planning to do. For nations that want to rapid expand and for world conquest, the 20% siege ability is going to be much more useful than the morale of armies. But the morale of armies is going to be a more secure pick if you're not necessarily trying to play that way. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learn more about these idea groups and have a better understanding of them, and it helps you choose which one you want to go with in the future. This has been darkfireslide, and I'll see you guys on the next one.